Welcome back to another Explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving into something that is, honestly, deeply tragic. It's an incredibly complex and rapidly unfolding case out of Lahore's Shah Jamal and Itra area. This is a story that has absolutely shocked the entire nation. It's dominating headlines and sparking intense public scrutiny everywhere. So, as we go through the source material today, our main goal is to just bring some clarity to the facts of the investigation. We'll unpack exactly how authorities took what initially looked like an unsolvable crime and started piecing together the grim reality underneath it all.
Okay, let's dive into this. The reality of this case begins with a scene that is literally every parent's worst nightmare. Picture this: a residential flat on the second floor of a four-story building, locked from the inside. And when that door was finally opened, the unimaginable was discovered. It initially presented as what law enforcement calls a blind murder. That means no obvious witnesses, no immediate suspects, just a completely devastating crime scene and grieving parents who claimed they had simply gone out to the market.
But before we get into the forensics and all the shifting narratives, we absolutely must ground ourselves in the heartbreaking baseline facts. At the center of this tragedy are three young victims, three young lives taken way too soon. They were identified as 5-year-old Momina Batul, her 4-year-old brother Momin Raza, and their 18-month-old baby sister Ume Habiba. All three were found lifeless in the apartment with their throats slit.
So how did this all unfold? Let's walk step by step through the initial timeline of events, exactly as they were first reported to the authorities by the family. According to these early statements, the night before the incident was marred by a really severe domestic dispute in the home. We're talking a heated argument between the mother and her in-laws. Then, the next morning, the parents, Ramzan, who is a motor mechanic, and his wife Rita, claimed they left the apartment to go to the market. Later that afternoon, the children's uncle was reportedly seen leaving the house and the mother returned. And it was just shortly after this sequence that the flat was found locked from the inside and that devastating discovery of the children was made. But here's the thing: this timeline almost immediately raised massive red flags for the authorities.
Which brings us to Section 1, Initial Claims and Suspicions.
Sensing some pretty glaring contradictions in the stories being told, the police took swift action. They detained the mother, Rita, the father, Ramzan, and the children's uncle for questioning. Now, investigators know that in cases like this, those first 48 hours are absolutely critical, right? The statements from those closest to the victims have to be verified against hard evidence. And when we objectively compare the narratives here, the inconsistencies become super obvious. For starters, the mother's alibi involved a claim that she had left the house to visit a medical store, and she initially pointed fingers directly at her mother-in-law, accusing her of being involved in the killings. However, the objective police findings painted a totally different picture. Investigators pulled CCTV footage from around the building, and it clearly showed the uncle leaving the premises, followed shortly by the mother returning alone to the flat. So her attempt to cast blame on her mother-in-law began to completely fall apart when matched against this objective digital footprint.
And this brilliantly illustrates our second section, the investigative breakthrough.
Moving past the verbal statements, investigators really had to rely on the unblinking eye of forensic science. The crucial point here is the evidence trail. You see, the investigation didn't just stop at that CCTV footage. Authorities utilized call detail record, or CDR analysis, which basically tracks phone communications and locations. Physically, forensic teams recovered blood evidence not just in the room where the children were found, but also in the bathroom, and that's a huge detail because it indicates the scene had been tampered with. Even more damning, police sources discovered that the murder weapon, a sharp knife, was actually purchased by the mother a day prior to the incident. On top of all that, the DIG Operations Lahore explicitly debunked these early, kind of bizarre rumors that the children were found holding knives themselves, calling those claims entirely false.
The sheer weight of this objective, multi-layered evidence completely dismantled that initial alibi. I mean, faced with the CCTV footage, the phone records, and the entire forensic timeline, the mother, Rita, formally confessed to the killings during interrogation. And because the hard data corroborated this confession and ruled out the others, the uncle and the father, Ramzan, were actually cleared of involvement in the murders and released from custody.
But here's the thing. A confession only really answers the how in the who. It naturally shifts our focus to the most complex, disturbing, and frankly, heavily debated question of this entire investigation. What was the true motive? Why did this nightmare actually occur?
Let's look into Section 3, Uncovering the Motive.
The interrogation revealed deeply conflicting narratives regarding the why. As we go through this source material, we're going to impartially report on the two very different accounts that have emerged from the investigation so far. Let's look at the conflicting motives side by side. On one side, we have the police's data-driven theory. According to investigators citing CDR data, the mother had developed a phone-based relationship with a man named Shahryar Injong. She had received money from him via a mobile app and was allegedly planning a divorce to marry him, which would make the children, tragically, an obstacle. But on the flip side is the mother's own claim during her interrogation. She alleges a history of severe spousal abuse, claiming her husband forced her into illicit relations. She stated she wanted to take her own life but abandoned the plan because she was terrified of leaving her children at the mercy of others. Now, we are not taking sides here at all. We are simply looking at the stark contrast between the digital data presented by law enforcement and the harrowing domestic abuse allegations presented by the accused.
Which brings us to our final section, legal action and aftermath.
So, with the confession secured, but the motive still heavily contested, we turn to the current status of the legal proceedings and the aftermath of this devastating loss. Following the arrest, the police brought the accused before a judicial magistrate in Model Town, Lahore. And while the investigating officers requested a 14-day physical remand to thoroughly complete their inquiries, to cross all the T's and dot the I's, the judge ultimately granted a 5-day physical remand instead. Now, that 5-day remand is absolutely crucial for the precise next steps the authorities are taking. The investigation officer noted that this time is specifically needed to conduct a formal polygraph test on the mother. Additionally, police teams have been actively dispatched to Jang to try and locate and apprehend Shahryar, just to understand his exact role or knowledge of the events. And of course, the meticulous forensic analysis of the crime scene continues. Make no mistake, this is a highly active, rapidly developing investigation.
But amidst all the forensic data, the court remands, the legal maneuvering, we really must ground this narrative back in the devastating human reality. Following the post-mortem examinations, the bodies of the 3 young children were handed over to their relatives. They were taken to their native town in Jang, where they were laid to rest in Mahala Sajadiya amidst immense grief and a massive gathering of mourners.
I want to end this explainer with a pretty stark quote from the DIG Operations Lahore. He stated blood evidence has been recovered from both the room and bathroom, while forensic analysis is ongoing. It's just a profound reminder of the objective realities of the criminal justice system. When human testimonies conflict, when motives are all tangled up in allegations of abuse or deceit, it is ultimately the silent, undeniable physical evidence that the courts are going to have to rely on. So what will the final forensic reports reveal, and how in the world will the justice system weigh these conflicting motives in the face of such an unimaginable tragedy? That is something we will absolutely continue to watch closely. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.